Stephanie Cotsirilos, thank you for being here and kicking off Persistence U's fifth season. I am so honored that you are here with me today.
The pleasure is mine. It's wonderful to meet you.
It is wonderful to meet you, and we've chatted about the fact that we have Alaska connections, we have a Greek connection, we needed to be together to have this conversation. So I just am so grateful. Please tell us a little bit about yourself and what is the story behind your story?
Ah, well, thanks for asking. And by the way, not too many people have both an Alaska connection and a Greek connection. What a combination,
I
right?
love it. And
I
even a
know.
Tennessee connection, which we'll talk about too.
That's
Yes.
right. Well, I'm going to add to what I've already told you that I am the granddaughter of Greek immigrants, some of whom could read and write, and some of whom could not. And so the very idea of being a writer is a privilege. You know, those are
True.
the forebears who brought me to where I am now. And I'm doing things that particularly the women of that generation could not have dreamed of doing. My first language was Greek, by the way, not English, but I learned English quite quickly, pardon me, after I learned Greek. And after going to school, I entered into the performing arts as a first career, which my grandmothers didn't particularly approve of, but there you have it. That's what I did.
Of
And
course
so,
they didn't.
of course. So I was in New York performing arts. I performed on Broadway, off Broadway, wrote some songs, scripts, lyrics, and had a had a really rich first go at it. I did that for about 15 years. And in an event that you and I may talk about some more, um, I found myself watching TV coverage of the Mexico earthquake of 1985. And I had a dear friend sitting on the sofa with me at my apartment. She and I had been in a Broadway show together. And I looked at the rescue dogs going in and out of the rubble, retrieving scents that led to the saving somebody's life. And I turned to my friend and said, you know what? I don't have a single skill set that those people need. Now, look, Lisbeth, I'm not putting down the profound experience and um, skills that are necessary to have a life in the arts. I'm not putting that down at all. It's just that that moment was my moment to do something different. It hit me in the heart. And despite the fact that I thought I would never be accepted in a law school, I started applying. It didn't hurt that everybody in my family was a lawyer, so they were quite supportive of this new direction. Right? But within 18 months, I was in law school and practiced. After the death of my husband, I did move from New York to Maine. And over that time, life has a funny way of calling you back. You think you're going along just fine. And I found in Maine that while translating my legal skills into consulting with nonprofits, here comes the Portland Ballet, which needs a new executive director or an interim executive director while they search for their new one. And it happened to be me, the interim. Here I was in my office listening to the music of the Nutcracker, which I had studied as a small child, immersed in the arts again. I could smell the resin in my old ballet teacher's ballet studio, and somehow there was a demand in my heart that said, you got to return. So I started taking lessons, meaning going to writers' conferences, registering for webinars, for seminars, anything I could get my hands on to advance my writing. And I returned to the arts and became a writer and published my first novella after the age of 70.
Oh, I love that. And when you say Portland, by the way, you mean Portland, Maine.
Thank you. Yes.
Because most of us should think Oregon, but that's wrong. Oh, that's so exciting. So after the age of 70, you did it. A lot of people will say, I used to think about being a writer, but time got away from me. And
Sure.
That's not an excuse. If someone feels the calling, there's a lot of work to be done, but that's
Right.
exciting.
You know, I've already mentioned to you, I believe that I won't lie that it's easy. Okay.
Right.
All right. It's not as though um, you're in the same position as someone who is 30, 35, or 40 entering into the writing world. It isn't the same. And can't always connect with readers, meaning getting your work in front of readers, as easily, perhaps, as you might want. But what you do know is the reason you're writing. And if it's strong enough, then you have to do it. You just have to do it. And you've already lived the decades that came before, right? So you can write about those. But now you're writing about new decades that not everybody out there knows about. Go for it, right?
I love it. And I think one advantage we spoke of earlier that we have as older women is we don't spend as much time thinking about what other people are, how they're judging us, if they're thinking about us, if everything will fall flat and we'll never feel the same again about ourselves.
Right.
You know, there's a lot more confidence at times that uh, time brings with us, time and experience.
Right.
And so that's really a huge asset to the writing process.
It is. I think you're totally right about that. Though some days you wonder where that confidence has gone. But that's the human condition. That's just how
Yes.
it is. What I feel um, is available to you at this stage is once again knowing why you're doing this. Okay, if you really have something to say at this point, you really need to say it.
Right.
Now is the moment to say it. And finding out how to say it is, of course, the artist's task. How do I do this? Reading, 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 of course, studying, going to conferences like the Sewanee Writers Conference, which I mentioned to you earlier, which is in Tennessee,
Beautiful.
which is and it's a gorgeous place. I went there last summer and learned immense amounts with extraordinary people. At the end of the day, however, it's you and your computer or your pen, and you need to consult yourself and say, is this really what I need to do right now? And if it is, you absolutely have to do it. It's a great luxury, though. I'll tell you, Elizabeth, I understand. It's also a luxury. Let me not lie about this either. Um, I do not have to work for a living in the way I used to at the moment, and that isn't true of everybody. So I want to acknowledge the privilege that attaches to my being able to do this.
I love it. And I will also say you've done some other amazing things to just enhance your writing skills, even though honestly, being a lawyer, you're a writer right there. I mean, you're
Yeah.
writing constantly as a lawyer,
Yeah.
but you've done some other things. Like you went to Alaska. So
Right.
can you explain some of the things you were willing to do to roll up your sleeves and present the best writing and storytelling you could?
Yeah, great question, actually. I'm going to start with a New York City conference that I went to. It's called the Writers Hotel, and they also publish a journal every year. They're publishing their 10th anniversary journal called The New Guard this year, and it's a beautiful volume. I recommend it to people. I decided, on the advice of a friend, that I needed to apply to this place. He said to me, I know that you're entering writing at a later phase of life, but do not pass up the idea of applying for this conference. I said, are you sure? He said, do it. I did it. And I got in, and I attended for something like 4 or 5 years consecutively and met people from all over the globe. At that time, the conference was in New York City. And you went from one lecture to one workshop to the next workshop, and so on and so forth. And it was the first time in my life that I brought something in which I was quite vulnerable. I was writing about my husband's death. And I brought this manuscript to the workshop, and I will never forget the moment when, after everyone had read it and given me their feedback verbally and in writing, they stood up all at once and handed me their written comments for me to look at later. It was as though 10 other people had stood up and said, I love you enough to give you this.
That is a beautiful way to look at it too. Not everyone receives feedback in that fashion, but that's the best way possible. That's an act of caring that they want you to be able to bring your best.
That's right. And even if I disagreed later on with what they had written or thought, oh, we're not on the same page, they stood up that day and
Right.
said, I put this much into you here. So that was the first time that I put my work out there, and I was deeply grateful. One of the founders of that conference suggested the Story Knife Writers Retreat to me, and that was the Alaska retreat that I mentioned to you earlier when we spoke. This is a brilliant retreat. Every woman listening should consider applying to this retreat. Story Knife is its title because the founders are um, deeply respectful of Native Alaskan culture and the Native Alaskan women writers who populate Alaska. And they work together on this retreat. Story Knife refers to the utensil, the tool that Native Alaskan writers used to write stories in the snow. And so that's the title of this thing. They have created a compound near Homer, Alaska, on Cook Inlet. There are 6 cabins, one for each writer who is accepted for that month. And they do this for the duration of 5 or 6 months. There is a main
Yes.
cabin with, a main cabin with a cook who cooks every night beautiful organic meals for you, delivers lunch to your cabin door. The executive director's office is in that main cabin. And to say it's exquisite doesn't begin to cover it. You are in view of Mount Iliamna, which is a volcano across the inlet, and you wake up to this jutting volcanic peak covered in blinding snow every morning. And in that setting, you write. You have a wood stove, actually a gas stove in your cabin. And it's a magnificent opportunity and a magnificent challenge. A month is a long time.
That is a very long time. It is, but what a gorgeous retreat. As somebody
Yes.
who lived in Alaska forever,
Yeah.
Homer is just magnificent. Such a place that inspires creativity. A lot of creatives live around the Homer
Yes.
area.
Yes, they do. How long did you live in Alaska, Lisbeth?
More than 50 years. So
Oh,
yes, more than
oh,
50 years. So I went as a toddler and moved here finally out of Alaska just 2 years ago. So the bulk of my life, unless I live to 100 and let's say 20, will always have been spent in Alaska. That is,
oh.
for all intents and purposes, that was home. That was
No,
home.
that's extraordinary. And thank you for asking about putting yourself out there to risk being with other people.
Sure.
Right? I already told you about the New York Writers Hotel, which was just transformative. But deciding to get yourself to Alaska, right?
Right.
From Portland, Maine, where I live. On the Continental, I had to cross a continent and then fly myself up to Alaska. By the way, during the tail end of COVID.
Oh,
Yeah, they
yeah.
had, I know, they had to cancel one of their seasons because the pandemic was just too active that year. But the second year, they figured if you masked along the way and you complied with their testing requirements before you got there and their masking requirements until you cleared the test, that they could do this thing. So you had to say to yourself, will I do this? And my answer was yes.
That was a huge commitment of time and resources and a lot of faith.
Yes.
You had to have faith in yourself to be able to make it a priority and do this. And it sounds like the outcome was pretty amazing.
It
So
was really
then, yes, what did you have by the time you left? What had you learned and what did you walk away with?
what a wonderful question. I learned a lot about writing my second novel. It actually is my first standalone book was a novella, which is shorter. So I actually learned about writing the next piece, which was a novel. And I learned enormous amounts about the exploration of character, not all of which was going to survive in a late draft. And I came away with 120 pages of that. It was only the beginning, but I don't think I could have explored the characters in this novel without that level of persistence, to your point
Yes,
of persistence, because every day you got up and you said, I could let this day go. Nobody's checking up on you.
right.
Or I could try to fill this day. And sometimes I found myself falling asleep. And sometimes I found myself looking out the window, of course. I would go for walks in the area and among these enormous pines. And I'd come back and ask myself, just do more. Just do more. It doesn't have to be perfect. Keep writing. And when I found myself up against a wall, I would say, what can you do now to get yourself up over or around this wall? And I found out that for me, that meant taking the characters I was writing and bringing them all together in a room and making them talk to each other. And suddenly I knew more about them.
Oh, okay.
And suddenly I knew, oh my goodness, maybe maybe the story of this novel will now go in another direction because they triggered one another, these characters. It's been a very long process, but that was the beginning of my learning about that novel.
Oh, I think that's fantastic. So now you have your novella, you're in an anthology. If you could explain a little bit about that,
Sure.
and then you have more coming.
Yep, exactly. I'm in an anthology that I was very grateful to be involved in. It's a collection of Maine writers, actually New England writers, on the subject of food, family, and hunger. And the anthology was put together by two wonderful editors, Deborah Spark and Corey.
Okay.
They wanted to put together an anthology that exposed and explored the reality of hunger in the state of Maine and elsewhere. Proceeds from this book, by the way, will go to a hunger related organization in Maine. So there's a social justice component to the entire
Beautiful.
right, the entire project. And they wanted people to submit to them essays about either hunger or what food meant to them and their family, or obstacles in getting food or obstacles in loving food, something about food. So I submitted my essay and I was delighted to be included. It was about a Greek woman who lived with my family when I was a young girl, because my mother was quite ill at the time. And this woman came to help take care of us. My mother, who was getting better, was serving our dog. This is in northern Illinois, where I grew up, was serving our dog her dinner. And my mother opened a can of wet dog food called Red Heart dog food. It's from way back. And she was spooning that into our dog's bowl. And the woman who took care of us looked at my mother and said, "You feed that to your dogs?" And my mother said, "Yes." Well, yes. It turns out that the woman who cared for us had survived on that dog food after
Mhm.
World War II. And she told my mother that somehow, some way, her village located cans of this dog food. Either a truck had overturned or something, and had lived on that meat, that wet meat, for a long time. My mother never served that dog food to our dog again, of course. But I learned that was one of the few stories about post-World War II in Greece that my mother told us about. It could even have been from the Greek Civil War. And from that story, I understood something about what my privilege was, what food meant to me, and what I didn't know about this woman who was living under the same roof with me. So I wrote an essay about it, and I connected it to many people here in Maine who are insecure about food, people all over the place,
Right.
all over our country and the world, who are not sure where their food is coming from and how much they had in common with somebody who helped raise me. It was an extraordinary opportunity.
That's beautiful. And also it's easy to know your sense of purpose, and I'm sure that made it a little bit easier to finish. And then to have it help serve those who are food insecure, that the proceeds went to different organizations. That's wonderful because it makes marketing the book a lot easier. And those are good lessons for you then to take to your novella, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah. It's I think these women who the editors, who both of certainly one of whom is a writer in her own right, understood very clearly what their position was with respect to the marketplace, not in an avaricious sense, but saying this is our purpose in
Right.
producing this book. And they've done well with it, I think.
That's beautiful.
Yeah,
That's really a lovely story.
yeah.
What are you working on now and how can people connect with you?
Well, there you go. I am working now on that novel that I was working on at Story Knife, and it's a novel about a search for personal grace in very difficult circumstances. You'll see as I describe it how the law figures into my writing. It's about a murder victim's mother, her best friend, and a death row prison guard, all of whom resist the capital punishment system and buck it in order to recover and reclaim their humanity when the state of Arkansas decides to execute 8 men in 10 days. These characters ultimately say no. Now, it's not a polemic. It's about falling in love with these 3 people whom you never would put together otherwise, and how they recover, I will call it grace, what they really mean to do with their lives.
I
So,
love that. And especially with the exercise you talked about before, as you were at Story Knife, where you invited basically the characters to the table to
yeah,
talk to each other, to get to know each other.
that's right. That's right. So you can find not that novel, but certainly my novella and the
Yes.
anthology at my website, which is my name, StephanieCotsirilos.com. Would you like me to spell it for you? Or
Yes.
okay.
It's a beautiful Greek name, and those are, can be tricky for us. So yes.
Yes, absolutely. So Stephanie is Stephanie. Cotsirilos is Cotsirilos, and it's all one word, no caps,
Perfect.
.com. And there you will see that you can purchase my novella either as an ebook or hard paperback through the normal outlets, Barnes and Noble and Amazon and so forth. And you'll just get information about that and the anthology and journal articles and stuff like that.
Fantastic. I very much enjoyed that conversation because you've really invited people along your journey, but it could be theirs also. You never know.
I hope so. I hope so. I think, you know, every minute you have, I sound a little bit corny now, but I mean it.
I love it. Yes.
Every minute you have is a gift, even when it hurts like hell, because you're here, aren't you?
Right.
And go for it.
I love that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this today.